All right, so today we're diving into a case that immediately grabbed my attention, the disappearance of Michaela Bali.
Yeah.
16 years old, vanished from Yorkton, Saskatchewan back in 2016.
hmm
And we're using an episode of the Crime Junkie podcast as our source material for this deep dive.
Okay.
And even just skimming through it, something about this case just feels different.
Yeah, the circumstances surrounding Michaela's disappearance are definitely complex. And what stands out to me is how her movements on the day she vanished seem almost deliberately confusing.
It really does challenge that typical image of a teenager running away. You know, we know her grandmother dropped her off at school at 8:10 a.m.
Right.
Her phone even connected to the school's Wi-Fi, but then she never actually went to class.
Yeah, and from there, the timeline gets even more puzzling over the next few hours. She's seen all over Yorkton, a pawn shop, the bank, in and out of Tim Hortons multiple times.
Mm.
There's even footage of her walking past a hardware store, only to turn around and go back in minutes later. It's not a direct route anywhere.
It's like she was trying to be seen, but also make it difficult to track her movements. What are some of the investigative approaches you'd take to try and make sense of a timeline like this?
Well, in a case like this, you have to consider the possibility that she was under duress, being directed by someone else, maybe even threatened.
Yeah.
But there's also the chance this was a calculated attempt to mislead anyone who might be looking for her.
Okay, so two very different scenarios, but both fitting the facts as we know them so far. What else in the source material jumps out at you?
Those phone calls Michaela was making at Tim Hortons are particularly interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Police have records, but they only tell part of the story. The activity they show doesn't match up with what's seen on the surveillance footage.
That's definitely strange. What could explain that discrepancy?
It's possible she was using apps to communicate secretly. Apps like Kik, for example, offer end-to-end encryption, making it much harder for law enforcement to track conversations.
Right.
It's not unusual for teenagers to use these kinds of apps to keep their communications private, especially if they're trying to avoid parental monitoring.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember using all sorts of workarounds to keep things private from my parents back when I was a teenager.
Exactly. And we have to consider the possibility that Michaela was doing something similar. This raises the question, what was she so determined to keep secret?
It makes those texts she sent to her friend Shelby even more puzzling. I need help. Followed by, never mind, I figured it out.
Right.
All while she's seemingly calm and collected on the security tapes.
Yeah.
If you were leading this investigation, where would you start digging in?
Those texts are definitely a focal point. It seems like something was going on that she felt she couldn't share openly, but then managed to resolve on her own, or at least she thought she did. What's particularly interesting is that shortly after sending those texts, she's seen asking a stranger about getting a hotel room. Why ask a stranger when she seemingly has friends she could turn to?
It's like she was deliberately avoiding anyone in her established circle. Maybe she was trying to keep her actions under the radar, or perhaps there's something more going on here.
Right. There's also that intriguing detail about the backpack. Michaela usually carried a messenger bag, but was using a backpack on the day she disappeared. Her mother mentioned it was a last-minute switch because Michaela's usual bag was buried under laundry.
It seems like a small thing, but could that be more significant than it appears?
It's worth considering any change in routine, especially in a case like this, can be a clue.
Right.
Was it simply a matter of circumstance, or was there a reason Michaela needed the extra space a backpack provided?
Could it have been premeditated? Was she packing for a longer trip than anyone knew about?
It's a possibility, but we need more information to say for sure.
And then there's that tip about the unidentified man at the bus depot. A witness saw Michaela with an older man who had a very distinctive tattoo, a cross with red flames. It seems like a solid lead, so why hasn't it led anywhere?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
There are a few possibilities. Maybe it was a case of mistaken identity. After all, memory can be unreliable, especially in stressful situations. Or perhaps this man was involved somehow and managed to evade detection.
So we have these tantalizing pieces of information, but it's hard to know which ones are truly important and how they all fit together.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, where some of the pieces are missing and the ones you do have don't quite seem to fit.
And speaking of trying to solve this puzzle, we have to talk about Michaela's online presence. She was active on quite a few social media platforms and seemed to be communicating with a lot of different people online, many of them older men.
This is a crucial part of the investigation. Remember those texts we mentioned earlier, the ones where Michaela was asking her friend for a ride to the bank because she had $5,000?
Right, and there was also that odd behavior at Tim Hortons where she kept taking her phone apart and seemingly swapping something inside.
Exactly. If we connect those two things, it raises some very important questions. Was that $5,000 connected to someone she met online? Was someone pressuring her for money? And was she using a second SIM card to communicate with someone she didn't want her family or friends to know about?
Those are some pretty disturbing possibilities. Is there any indication from the police investigation about who Michaela might have been talking to online?
They have investigated some of her online contacts, but there are others who remain more of a mystery.
So we have a teenager with a complex web of online interactions exhibiting strange behavior in the hours leading up to her disappearance.
And it all culminates with that text message to her friend Shelby, "I need help."
Right.
What was going on in that moment? And was that, never mind, text genuine? Or was she being coerced?
Okay, so we have a lot to unpack here, but before we delve any deeper, let's take a moment to process all this information. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into Michaela Bali's disappearance.
Welcome back. Before we paused, we were discussing some pretty concerning possibilities about Michaela's online interactions and that plea for help she texted to her friend.
Right, and it feels like there's this growing sense of urgency as we move through the timeline. Like things are escalating in a way Michaela maybe didn't anticipate.
It's a valid observation. If she was indeed involved in something she felt she needed to hide, perhaps a relationship with someone she met online, it's possible the situation spiraled out of control faster than she expected.
And if that's the case, could that never mind text be a sign that she felt trapped or pressured into going along with something she no longer felt safe doing?
That's a chilling thought, and it's definitely a possibility we need to consider. It's not uncommon for predators, especially those operating online, to use manipulation and coercion to control their victims.
Right.
They might start by building trust and exploiting insecurities, but then gradually escalate their demands, making it increasingly difficult for the victim to break free.
That level of control is terrifying, especially for someone as young as Michaela. And it makes me wonder about those sightings of her in various cities across Canada and even the US. Could someone have been moving her around against her will?
That's another piece of this puzzle that's really hard to place. None of the sightings have been confirmed, but they do raise questions about whether someone might have been helping her disappear or perhaps even forcing her to stay hidden.
But if someone was controlling her movements, wouldn't we expect to see some evidence of that witnesses' security footage, something?
Not necessarily. Skilled manipulators can be very good at operating under the radar.
Mm.
They know how to avoid detection and coerce their victims into complying with their demands without attracting attention.
Okay, so we have this unsettling possibility that Michaela was being manipulated by someone, maybe even moved around against her will. But there's also the theory that she chose to disappear, maybe to escape a difficult situation at home or to start a new life somewhere else.
It's true that running away is a possibility, especially given her age and the fact that teenagers sometimes make impulsive decisions.
Yeah.
But if she did choose to run away, why would she go to such lengths to cover her tracks? Why create this elaborate trail of misdirection?
It's like she wasn't just trying to disappear, but to actively create a new identity, a new reality where her past couldn't touch her.
Exactly. And that level of calculated deception, assuming she was acting alone, suggests a level of fear or desperation that's hard to fathom. What was she so terrified of that she felt she had to completely erase herself?
If we go back to those online relationships, is it possible she became entangled with someone dangerous, someone who convinced her to cut ties with everyone she knew, someone who might even be hiding her now?
That's a very real possibility. Online predators can be incredibly convincing, especially when targeting vulnerable young people. They know how to exploit insecurities, build trust, and ultimately control their victims' actions.
Thinking about those online interactions, I remember reading in the source material that Michaela was seemingly very careful about what she shared online. There's mention of her taking her phone apart and possibly switching SIM cards.
Right. That level of secrecy points to a conscious effort to compartmentalize her communication. She was clearly trying to keep certain conversations and activities hidden from her family and friends.
Mm.
It begs the question, what was she so determined to keep secret?
It's like we're seeing these glimpses of a hidden life, but we're missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. And that lack of information makes it incredibly difficult to separate speculation from fact.
It's one of the most frustrating aspects of this case. We have these intriguing details, these potential clues, but without a clear understanding of the full picture, it's hard to know which direction to take the investigation.
We've explored the possibility that Michaela was being manipulated or even coerced by someone, maybe someone she met online. We've considered the theory that she might have chosen to disappear, meticulously covering her tracks to avoid being found. But is there anything else we haven't considered? Are there any other angles we should be exploring?
One thing that stands out to me is the lack of any physical evidence. No body, no signs of a struggle, no personal belongings found discarded. If something happened to Michaela, it was incredibly well concealed.
That's a chilling thought. Does the absence of physical evidence point us in any particular direction? Does it support one theory over another?
It's hard to say for sure. It's possible that any evidence of what happened to Michaela is hidden somewhere we haven't looked yet, or perhaps it was deliberately disposed of.
So even the lack of evidence becomes another piece of this complex puzzle. We're left with more questions than answers and a haunting sense that there's something crucial we're still missing.
It's a case that defies easy explanations, and that's precisely why it's so important to keep digging, to keep asking questions, and to keep Michaela's story in the public eye.
Before we do that, though, let's take a moment to let all of this sink in. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's important to give ourselves time to process all the information and emotions this case brings up. We'll be back soon to wrap up our deep dive into Michaela Bali's disappearance. We've spent a lot of time examining the details of Michaela's disappearance, and I have to say, this case has really gotten under my skin. It feels like every answer just leads to more questions.
It's a case that stays with you, that makes you question everything you think you know about human behavior, about the hidden dangers that can lurk in seemingly ordinary lives.
I keep thinking about that last text message, "I need help," and how quickly it was followed by, "Never mind, I figured it out." Was she really okay, or was that a sign that someone was controlling her communication?
It's impossible to know for sure, but it's a question that highlights the complexity of this case. Was she a victim of manipulation? Did she orchestrate her own disappearance? Or is there something else entirely at play here, something we haven't even considered?
If we step back and look at the big picture, what's your gut feeling about this case? What seems most likely to you, given all the information we have?
Honestly, it's hard to say. There's compelling evidence to support a number of different theories, and each one raises its own set of questions. On one hand, the elaborate misdirection, the secret communication, the sudden change in routine, all of those things point to a possibility that someone was involved, that Michaela was being manipulated or coerced. But on the other hand, there's also the possibility that she was a master manipulator herself, that she orchestrated this entire disappearance to escape a situation she felt trapped in.
It's a difficult case to wrap your head around, and it's easy to get caught up in the speculation, the what-ifs, the could-have-beens. But at the end of the day, there's a real person at the heart of this. A young woman who vanished without a trace, leaving her family and friends in agonizing uncertainty.
You're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important to keep Michaela's story alive, to keep searching for answers, even when the trail seems cold. We owe it to her and to her loved ones to never give up hope.
Well, we've discussed a lot of possibilities, but I think it's important to leave our listeners with this. If you have any information about Michaela Bali's disappearance, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, please contact the authorities. There's still a $100,000 reward for information leading to her safe return. You can find all the relevant contact information in the show notes.
Every piece of information, every detail could be the key to unlocking this mystery and bringing Michaela home.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of emotions, intrigue, confusion, sadness, and a profound sense of urgency. Michaela's story is a reminder that behind every missing person case, there's a life interrupted, a family left in limbo, and a mystery that deserves to be solved.
It's a reminder that even in the digital age where we leave behind a trail of data everywhere we go, someone can still vanish without a trace. And it's up to all of us to keep searching for answers, to keep the hope alive, and to never forget the missing.
Well said. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. You never know when you might stumble upon a clue that could help bring someone home.